So yeah, I want to talk about budgeting tonight, and it's really been neat. The other classes so far, just really talking about how we manage money is really an issue of the heart. And when I began to kind of prepare to talk about budgeting, at first I thought it would just be spreadsheets and expense reports and that kind of thing. But as I really began to kind of look at what Scripture says about it, there was really a lot more to it, because you don't really think you just turn to Leviticus and there's a spreadsheet or something, but there's really a lot in there that kind of talks about the idea behind budgeting, even though it doesn't necessarily lay out the itemized budget. And really, what is a budget? And in its simplest form, a budget is just a plan on how you're going to spend your money before you get it. Dave Ramsey is a financial guy. He's on the radio a lot, and he has a quote which I love, talking about budgeting, and he says, "A budget tells your money where to go instead of wondering where it went." I know I've been in that situation too many times, where you get to the end of the week, get to the end of the month, and you look back and you're like, "What happened? Where I thought we were doing good. Where'd all my money go?" And then you start like, "Oh, that's right. We went here. We did that. We spent this," and you spent way more than you intended to, because you just, at least I do, because I didn't have a plan for the money. And then, the Scripture tells us that planning is a wise thing to do. Proverbs 21:5, it says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." And it's that plan of the diligent that leads to abundance. It's like we can't just sit back and just think, well, I'm just going to wing it and just hopefully everything works out and I'll end up with abundance. Because there's always going to be things that you're not counting on, things you spend too much on, and then you end up like, oh, wait, I forgot about this over here, and you run out. And then in Proverbs 27:23 through 24, it says, "Know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds, for riches do not last forever, and a crown does not endure to all generations." And I really love that scripture, because, know well the conditions of your flock. Like they're talking about, Kirk was talking about last week, flocks and herds, and especially in, the time that the Bible was written, that was the currency. That was the money, the thing that defined your wealth was, your crops, your herds, your flocks. And it's like, know well the condition of them. It's like, pay attention, to what you have. And that is, especially goes with money. And it's like, you think about, other things that we have, like our cars. If we don't pay attention to them, they end up breaking. You're like, I'm just going to ignore that little squeak, or, I'm not going to pay attention to, when the oil change is due. Next thing you know, your car is breaking down. It ends up being a huge expense. The same thing with your houses. It's like Ray was talking about, like a drippy faucet, and I'm just going to ignore that. I'm just not going to pay attention to it. Next thing you know, your floorboards are rotted. And it's like, all these things, basically everything in our lives, we have to give attention to. We have to maintain them, or else they're just going to slowly fall into ruin. And our finances are no different. If we don't pay attention to where our money's going, it's just going to go. And you really think about, over the course of your life, or really even the course of a year, but especially in your life, like how much money you handle. I mean, you think, even if you're like, well, I'm not rich, but, even if you just have an average paying job, you make, 30, 40, 50,000 a year, over, year after year after year, after a few years, I mean, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars. It comes in, goes out. Where does it go? What do you do with it? It's like, it's so easy just to lose track of it and not really do the best that you can with it. I watched a 30 for 30. ESPN has them. They're like a documentary thing a few years ago. They had one that was called Broke. And it was about NFL football players who, just a couple years after they get out of the league, are completely bankrupt. Some of them are homeless. And you think, man, NFL players, I mean, they get these million-dollar contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts. How do you squander away that much money in just a few years? Because I think, man, if I could just, if I had a couple $1 million, I would be set for life. But that's really not true. It's like, if you're not careful with the little bit you have, having more, I mean, it may take you a little bit longer to lose track of it and get rid of it, but you're going to lose track of it and get rid of it. So really it comes down to the principle of planning and paying attention to what we have. And it really doesn't matter how much you have, but paying attention to it and what are you doing with it. In Luke 14, Jesus is talking, and he says, "Which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin mocking him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes with 20,000? And if not, while the other is a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace." In the direct context, he's talking about, the cost of being a disciple of his and weighing that. But you can see the example that he uses. It talks about, seeing what you have and planning, and looking at it, saying, is this enough to do what I want? If you sit down to build a tower, do I have enough to finish it? Should I even start? Should I build a smaller tower? It's like, you go to, remodel your bathroom. And you're like, okay, great, I'm just going to go do it. And then you rip up the floor, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, I only had, a couple $100 and tiles this much and a sink's that much. And now you have this bathroom that's ripped apart, and you don't have any money to finish it. And then it just sits there, and it looks really foolish. And it's like, the same thing with, with the king going to war. It's like, does he have enough money to win this battle? And it's like, when we're budgeting, it's like, we're sitting down at the beginning of a month. Do I have enough money to do everything I want to do? And that's where you got to sit down. You got to look at, how much money do I actually make? And how much money is actually going out? Is there enough to cover it? And if not, what do I do about that? It's like, do I need to increase the income? Do I need to lower the outgoing? But, it shows, Jesus, it shows wisdom to sit down and actually think about what you have and what you want to do, and is there enough to actually cover that? And like if we go to, say, buy a car, you can just go to a car lot and be like, hey, that's a nice car, I want to buy that. But it's like, are we taking the time to be like, okay, well, what's the monthly payment on that? What's the interest on that? What's the upkeep on that? Can I actually afford, this car before I do it? Can I fit that into my budget? Do I have the extra money? And if it's not, then it's like, well, maybe I get a different car, or maybe I, ride the bus or whatever. But it's just that planning. It's that thinking about what we have, putting the time, which is sometimes hard, of putting the time and thought into what do we do with our money. And one of the reasons we should be a planner is because God himself is a planner. And, you look at the things that God has done, and there's so much order to it. Starting with creation, God didn't just be like, hey, I'm just going to create everything, and hopefully it all works out for the best, and everything fits together. And you look at the way the ecosystems work and the habitats work, how everything kind of fits together. There's clearly a design and an order to it. But even in the order in which he created things, Tricia was teaching the kids this not too long ago. I think it was last year. And I'd never even noticed it. The days of creation, the order to it, where, like on the first day, he created the heavens, like outer space heavens, and then, he separated the waters from the sky. And then on day 3, it was the land. And then on day 4, he goes back to day 1 and kind of fills up that area that he just created with, the sun, moon, and stars. And then on, the next day, he goes back and he fills up the water and the sky with birds and fish. And then he comes back to the land and fills it up with the animals and man and, and all those things. And it's like, it wasn't just some willy-nilly, I'm just going to create a bunch of stuff. It's like he had a definite order, a definite design, a definite plan. He put thought into what he wanted to do and how he was going to do it. And then, and salvation is no different. After Adam sinned in the garden, God wasn't scratching his head being like, okay, people sin, now what? What am I going to do now? It says in Acts chapter 2, verse 23 says, when Peter is preaching at Pentecost, he says, "This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men." Show that God, God's, he's perfect. He knows what's going to happen before it happened. He knew, Adam was going to sin. He knew that there was going to be a need for salvation, and he'd already planned for it. It wasn't a reaction. It wasn't an afterthought or a plan B. He had already taken care of it. He had already thought things through. And then the other thing is he has plans for his church. It says in Ephesians 2:10, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. It's like we're not an afterthought. It's like he knew we were going to be saved. He knew we were going to be here. And it's not like, oh man, there's a bunch of people in Alliance getting saved. Now what do I do? Oh, I guess I'll make a church. And, Kirk's not doing anything. I guess I'll have them be a pastor. It's like he has a plan. He's like, okay, I know these people are going to get, here's what I'm going to have this one do. This is what I'm going to have that one do. This is what I'm going to have this one do. I have a plan. I'm going to have I have a purpose for this. He put thought into it, and even like with Jeremiah, it says, he was called before, he said, before I formed you in my mother's womb, I'd called you to be a prophet. God doesn't just react. He plans ahead for things. And it's like, and we, as we want to be like God, we need to plan ahead for things too. And one of the things that we need to plan ahead for is hard times, because they're going to come sooner or later. Something bad is going to go wrong that we're not expecting. In Genesis 41, Pharaoh has the dream, and he has, he's looking for the interpreter, and Joseph comes and he ends up interpreting the dream, and it's he tells him the meaning is that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And he says in verses 34 through 36, "Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food for the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a preserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." And proper planning can help us survive these times of famine. It can be layoffs, injuries or illnesses, things that, unexpected bills or things. Before I got my job at the post office, I was a bricklayer, and didn't make a ton of money, but we did all right. We got by. It was always kind of tight, but we never really had savings. We're pretty much living paycheck to paycheck, and it was going okay for a while, and then I was doing residential work, and then I switched over. I started doing commercial work, and it was like great. It was a huge pay increase, and we thought, man, this is great. And we spent the money, and I remember Christmas that year was it was a pretty good Christmas. There was tons of stuff, and then January rolled around, and I got laid off, and it was like, okay, well, there's plenty of work out there. I'll be off work for a couple weeks, and I'll get picked up by another crew. And then the weeks went by, and then months, and then a couple months, and 6 months later, I'm still not working. And we had absolutely no plan for it. We had no savings. I was getting unemployment, but that was barely enough to cover just some of the basic bills. It's like we were charging all our groceries, all our gas, anything extra we were doing was going on a credit card. And even in that time, we were still being really foolish with our money. We're still, hey, let's go to Burger King or whatever. It's like it was just stupid how we were handling money. It's like we didn't plan ahead, and even when it was tight, we weren't like, okay, we're gonna knuckle down and just do the bare necessities. We were just, and we racked up, what was it, like 20,000 in credit cards in that 6 months. It was ridiculous. It took us, I did eventually, get on with the post office, which was, steadier work and was decent pay, but it took us years to pay that off. Just poor planning over a few months, it took us, 3-4 years to finally dig out of that, and then eventually someone kind of helped us finish it off, or it probably would have even taken longer than that. But it's like all of that could have been avoided if we would have just really been mindful of what we were doing, if we'd have, planned ahead, and, even if we, didn't have that much money in savings, we could have had more than nothing. And then during that time, if we'd have been thinking about what we were spending our money on, it's like we could have probably just really scraped our budget down, but we didn't. And it was really foolish. And then, if you look at nature prepares for hard times. In Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8, it says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, and consider her ways. Be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in winter." And it shows that even nature, prepares in that time of plenty for that time where there's going to be winter and there's going to be not as much resources. You see squirrels all summer just running around, burying nuts just constantly. It's like, I don't even know if they can remember where they all are, but they're just constantly just burying them. Just, it's like, okay, how much do you need? But I mean, that's just like, it's just in them, just to like, hey, winter's coming. I better hide something. I better, because there's going to be no food here. Other animals, they hibernate. They eat so much, to build up their fat so they can sleep through the winter or whatever. And it's like, we can learn from them in that way that, there's going to, if you're doing well now, you might not be doing well next year. So set some aside, be prepared for that, plan for that, as best you can. It's like we don't always know what's coming or when it's going to hit, but we can do our best to be diligent, to be prepared for that, so it's not as painful. And there's wisdom in that. And then in Proverbs 31:14, you have the Proverbs 31 woman, and she's like this woman who's esteemed for her character, and there's a lot of verses about her and different things that she does. But it says one of the things she does is in verse 14. It says, "She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar." And when you first read that, you kind of think like, well, why is that a great character quality, that she goes really far to get her food? You think, I mean, that's kind of a waste of time. Why did she just go someplace closer? But really, if you think about it, it's like how much planning would have to go into her doing that? It's like she's not just dependent on the last minute local conveniences or whatever. It's like she's taking the time to be like, okay, what do I need for my family? What kind of food do I need? What spices do I need? Where can I get them? What's a good deal? And I'm going to take that trip and I'm going to get them so that my family's provided for, that they're prepared for. And it's like, she's not dependent on those local last minute conveniences. It's like, imagine if we did all our grocery shopping at Circle K. I mean, you ever run out of cheese or something and you're like, oh, I'll just run down to Circle K and get it. And it's like $8 for a pack of cheese. And you're like, really? It's like I could have drove over to, Aldi's and got like a case of cheese for $8. And that's what this woman's doing. She's finding the deals. She's planning ahead. She's using wisdom and what does my family need and what's the best way to get it for them. And then it also says in verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. And I love that it says that she considers a field. She's not just walking home from work and she's like, hey, there's a field for sale. I need a field. Sold. And then she buys the field and realizes I'm going to plant a vineyard here. And then she realizes oh, wait, no, there's not really a water source here for my vineyard. And, it's really far from town. There's no main road and I can't really sell my crops anywhere. This is a really bad location for a field. I'm going to try to sell it. And then, the next person's like, well, no, that's a terrible location. I'm not going to buy your field. And then she's stuck with it. It's like she considers it. She's thinking about, okay, what do I want to use this field for? Okay, I want to plant a vineyard. Where is the location? Is it good ground? Is it, near, is it near a main road? Is it, is there a water source? Is this field going to fit what I need to buy it for? And she considers it. She thinks about it before she buys it, and then, she makes use of it. She prospers from it. And it's like we need to take that advice for ourselves, especially when we're making like a larger purchase. You think about like a car. It's like, you could go to a car and be like, my dream car, I would love to have a Jeep Wrangler. It's like, you see them like, oh man, those cars look so cool. I would love to be driving one. But, it's like, if I consider it, where I'm at right now, that's not a very practical decision. It's like, I can't fit 6 kids in them. Gas mileage isn't very good. The repairs on it are more expensive. It wouldn't be a very wise purchase for me to make. And it's like those things that, when we're spending our money, we need to consider what we're spending our money on. The same thing for, a house. It's like, even if you get a great deal on a house, it's like, well, what are the property taxes? Is it in a good neighborhood? Is it close to work? How's that going to change, my gas money or whatever? What's the resale value? All these things. It's like, before we make a purchase, we need to consider what we're doing. We just really need to think about it and be wise with our money and just, is what I'm buying going to fit my need? Do I really even need it? Is this just a luxury? Is my money better served going somewhere else? Or is this a good purchase for me? Is this going to fit what I want to do? And a budget is going to help. What a budget does, a budget helps you think about your money, and it helps you from being impulsive, because what you spend is already planned out. And the hardest part about keeping a budget, the hardest part of budgeting, is actually following the budget. Because you ever you make your budget. I don't know if you guys have done budgets before, but you sit down at the beginning of the month, you're like, okay, I'm going to make this much money and I have this much expenses, and you write it all out, and then you can just shove it in a folder and shove it in a drawer and never look at it again, and then just go about your merry way and be like, hey, well, I budgeted, and it does you absolutely no good because you're not following the budget. But if you actually follow the budget, your money's planned out. You're like, okay, how much money do I have for groceries? Well, I have, $500. Okay, that's all I get. So when I go to the store and, beef's on sale, I can't spend $700 because I only have $5. Or if I spend it all on beef, I can't buy any vegetables. It's like, it keeps you from just being impulsive, and it's like, and it's also an exercise in self-control. And that's really what, that's really what God's been showing me about keeping a budget. Because I know I for one, I'll admit, I have a hard time following a budget. We sit down, every month, we write out our budget, and usually a couple weeks in, we're like going back, like, oh, okay, we got to adjust this and that because, we've messed it up. And really what God's been showing me is like, it's just a lack of self-control. It's like, we plan out what we're going to spend, we decide beforehand what we're going to do, and then when the time comes, it's, nope, I'm not going to do that. I want to do something else with that money. Not what we decided, not what we took the time to plan out when we thought it through. I just want to be impulsive and just go get ice cream and go to a movie and whatever, and just spend it on something else that we hadn't even planned on. And so budgeting takes self-control, especially if you want to have a successful budget. And so what is self-control? Self-control is really just not being ruled by our passions and desires. As I begin really thinking about self-control, whenever anyone talks about self-control, I just immediately think like sin. Like, okay, well, I'm not going to give in to sin. Self-control is resisting sin. It's not, when I'm angry, it's not, telling somebody off or punching them in the nose, or it's not, hearing that juicy story and wanting to go tell somebody. It's like, no, I'm going to resist that, or, that lust or whatever. It's like, I'm going to resist that. I'm issuing self-control. But self-control is so much deeper than that. And it really is something that can apply to pretty much our whole realm of life. especially our finances. If we just go out and we just buy everything we want, we are going to go broke really, really fast. And when I say buy everything you want, I'm not just talking about just frivolous, I'm going to buy, 10 pairs of shoes and power tools and just things. I mean, even if it's things that you actually need, who can't look around their house and be like, well, I could use this, that, and that need, It's like you could look around your life and there's things that you need. And if you just this month decided to go out and buy it all, you're going to be broke and you're not going to have enough money left for the rent and for the utilities and for groceries because you spend it on something else. And that's where the self-control comes in. It's like, I'm going to sit down in a wise state of mind. I'm going to plan out what I want to do with this money, and then I'm actually going to do it. And I'm going to use self-control. When there's something else that comes up, I'm going to look at my budget. Have I planned for that? Have I set money aside for that? And if I haven't, then I have to deny that. I have to deny that flesh in me that wants to do something. I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to follow the budget. And it can be, in the self-control, it can getting up to go to work. It's like, no, I would rather lay in bed. No, I'm going to control myself. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go. But the thing about self-control is that, it says it's a fruit of the Spirit. In Galatians 5, it says, the fruit of the Spirit is, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And against such there is no law. If you think about that, a fruit of the Spirit is a fruit, a byproduct of the Spirit. It's not something that we just naturally possess in our flesh. It's like our flesh, we're just going to do what we want. There's going to be no self-control. I mean, sometimes it may seem like self-control, but it's really not. It's like, well, I'm going to do what I want, when I want, how I want. I'm going to spend my money on what I want. If I want to pay my rent because I want a place to live, I'm going to do that. And look at me, I'm being responsible. But really, self-control comes from the Holy Spirit. It's learning to deny your flesh. It's learning to do what's better, to do what God wants us to do with our money, to meet our obligations, to not just spend money on ourselves or do what we want. And self-control must be learned. It's something that, like I said, it doesn't come natural. It's something that we have to walk in, and sometimes it's really, really hard. And love and peace and patience, sometimes we're going to fail in these things, and we need to learn to exercise them, to walk in them. It says in Proverbs 21:17, whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man, and he who loves wine and oil will not be rich. And it's like, who doesn't love pleasure? Who doesn't love to go on vacation or love to eat at a fancy restaurant or love to, go to Indians games or whatever? Those things are fun. Everybody loves doing those things. But when it talks about somebody who loves pleasure, it's somebody who those things have an improper priority in their life. They're way too up the list. It's like, I want those things more than I want my responsibilities, more than I want my obligations. I want to spend money on those things. I just want to do what I find to be fun. And it's just, you won't be rich. It's just unwise to do that. There's nothing wrong with enjoying yourselves, but when it has that improper place, then we're just being self-centered. We're not being wise with our money, and we're just squandering it away. And I think the best example of that is in Luke 15, in the parable of the prodigal son. Jesus says, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a share of the property that is coming to me. And he divided the property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property on reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. and he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. And there you see a young man who showed absolutely no self-control. He had absolutely no plan for his money. Doesn't say how much the inheritance was that he got, but I would imagine it was sizable. It says later that, the father had many servants, and when he went home and said, my father's servants are treated better than this. So, you figure if a guy has servants, he's, probably pretty well off. So it's probably at least a decent inheritance. And he gets it, and he just squanders it in a matter of just a few days, probably, on reckless living. He went and he just, hey, I'm going to have a good time, and I'm just going to, I'm going to invite some of my friends, and I'm going to make some new friends, and we're just going to go, and it's just going to be a big party. And, a few days, a few weeks, however long it was, he's left with nothing. I mean, how long could he, if he'd have had a plan for that money, if he would have invested that money, if he'd have taken that money and said, you know what, I'm going to consider a field and go buy it and plant a vineyard, he would have been set for years to come. He could have started his own business, or he could have bought, who knows what he could have bought with it. But instead, he's like, I'm just going to indulge my flesh. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to have a good time and squander all my money away. And he was left with nothing. And it says, at the end, it says that no one gave him anything. It's kind of like, why didn't anyone give him anything? It's like, here's this guy, he's starving, he's out feeding the pigs, he's wanting to eat the pigs' food. You think, I'm sure somebody had something, somebody could have helped him out. But you figure these people are probably the same people that just watched him blow his entire inheritance away. So why would they help him? They're probably thinking, like, why should I step in and give this guy a hand when he just threw the party of his life and just spent thousands, just threw it away. Now he's left with nothing, and now he's coming to me asking for grocery money. I'm not going to help him out. How foolish is he? And it's like that whole situation could have been avoided for him if he would have had a plan for his money, if he would have thought about it, if he would have got this money. This is how much I have. What do I want to do with it? Hey, you know what? I like to have a good time. I'm going to take some of that, and I'm going to set it aside to go have a good time with. I'm going to invite my friends. We're going to go do whatever. But I'm going to make sure I have enough left over to live on. But he didn't. He just showed absolutely no self-control. And then, going back to Proverbs 21, which I read earlier, but I'm going to read again, it says, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Some translations say the hasty, they have it as reckless. And it's like, if we're reckless with our money, if we're not thinking about what we're doing, then we're going to come only to poverty. We're going to spend it on things that we didn't intend to. We're going to spend more than we intended to, and we're not going to be left with anything. So we need to be careful with what God has given us so that we can afford the things we need. It's like God provides for us. One of his names is, Jehovah Jireh, the provider. He gives us what we need. What do we do with that? Do we actually meet our needs with it, or do we just kind of be impulsive or just be selfish with it? Or, how do we actually, are we good stewards of what he has given us? Are we wise with it? And so when we make our budget, we need to have that in mind. We need to keep in mind, okay, this is what God has given me. What do I want to do with it? And one of the things that when we budget, we need to be realistic. How much money do I actually make, and what are my actual expenses? We can sit down and we can do a budget. Like say me and Trisha, we sit down and we do a budget, and we're like, okay, well, we don't need anything for clothes. We don't need anything for shoes. And Trisha, you get $200 this month for groceries. Okay, great. We made our budget. Awesome. Well, the problem is my kids never stop eating. I don't know if you've ever been around it, but I mean, they don't stop eating. It's like $200 a month is not enough for us for groceries. If I was single, I could probably live on $200 a month on groceries. But that's not realistic for our situation. The same thing with clothes. It's like, oh no, they don't need clothes. They don't need shoes. Oh really? I mean, maybe not this month, but next month they will. It's like, what, are we being realistic with what our actual expenses are? And the same thing, with our income. It's like, hey, well, you know what, we didn't quite make budget this year, but you know what, I'm going to work 50 hours of overtime next week and I'll make up for it. No, I'm not. It's like, is that even available? Is that, it's like, if you work that much overtime, great, but be realistic with what you're actually spending, because if you don't, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. If you're like, oh, I'm going to make it work, or if you're, hey, we like to eat out a lot. You know what? We're not going to spend any money eating out this month. You probably are. You're probably setting yourself up for a failure where you're going to end up spending money on that, and then it's not accounted for. And then you're like, okay, well, we just ordered pizza. Where does that money going to come from? Well, we got to take it from here, and then that comes due. Well, let's take more from over, and you start shuffling money around, and it ends up becoming a big old mess. And I know, because I've done that too many times. It's like we go over budget on one area, and it's like, okay, we ate out too much, so let's take money from the clothes envelope. Oh, well, now Rachel needs shoes. Okay, we'll take money out of the gifts envelope. Okay, well, now the clothes are covered. Oh, wait, no, Mother's Day is this month. Okay, we'll only pay half the electric bill this month. And it's like you end up getting yourself in a big mess because you weren't disciplined, you weren't showing the self-control, and you didn't have a realistic budget. And the other thing, if you're married and you're setting up a budget, you have to be on the same page as your spouse. It's something that you need to do together. Even if one person is like better with money, you need to talk it over. You need to kind of be on the same page, because, if I'm like all about saving money and Trish is all about, catching up on a bill, it's just going to be like, hey, I wanted to save that money. Oh no, I paid off this doctor bill. And it's just going to cause strife and tension between you, instead of being like, okay, here's how much money we have. Here's, the extra money, hopefully. What are we going to do with it? Instead of being like, I had plans for that money. Well, so did I. Well, no, mine come for, it's like, if you're not working together, you end up working against each other. And then, that's also going to fail. So the last couple pages I have is I have a budgeting sheet. I don't know, have you guys actually done budgets before? Has anyone never done one?
Never.
Never done one?
Done it?
Yeah.
Never followed one.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right. Yeah, that's the hard part.
I hate them.
Yeah.
I'm very frugal.
Yeah.
I have a lot of self-control, but I cannot put things in boxes like that. Oh my gosh. That
Yeah.
freaks me out.
Right. Well, I know one thing. Every time we do a budget, and sometimes we're going to be really strict about it and we follow the budget, and other times we're a lot looser with it. But I know for me, whenever we're following the budget, it's like this huge just stress burden that's just gone. Because if we're just like, hey, we have a bunch of money, we're going to spend it, and then Trisha's like, oh, hey, you know what? I went to Goodwill and they had dresses on sale, so I spent $50 on dresses for the girls. Instead of being like, oh, hey, that was a great deal. We had money set aside for clothes. Great, good find for you. It's, oh wait, she spent $50. Oh wait, where's that? Wait a minute, $50. How much do we have enough for this? How much do we have left? It's like, and then you're kind of scrambling because we're not following a budget. But it's like when you're actually following that budget, when you're actually planning out what you're going to do, then the money you spend, it's like, hey, we had money set aside for this. We spent it on this. No worries. It's like there's just almost a stress-free way of handling your money. Because you've already decided what you're going to do with it. So you already, it's already, if you had a problem with spending that much money on clothes, you could have talked about it before. Like, well, how about we only do $40 this month or whatever. But I know people budget differently. We do a monthly budget. I know I was talking with Bill Powell. He budgets for the whole year, which I think would be really hard to do. But, if that's how, however you do it is great. We do a monthly thing. It's like I usually know. I do work overtime, so it's like my checks are, a little bit different. But, I usually have a pretty good idea about how much money I'm going to make. And so, we start with that, and then if it ends up being over, then it's like, okay, well, we'll take whatever's left, and then we'll kind of re-budget, we'll fit that in, and then if it's under, then, we would have to adjust, from the expenses, okay, we can't pay as much on this or whatever. But, some of our, a lot of our obligations, they don't really change month to month. It's like if you have a mortgage or if you rent, that's the same payment every month. If you have a car payment, those things are usually, it's the same every month. And you can usually have a pretty good idea of like what you're going to spend on utilities and stuff. You can go back and you can look at, past statements, or, a lot of times utilities companies can even set you up on a budget where you just pay the same fee year round, and then, at the end of the year, you either have extra and you get it back, or you have to catch up a little bit. But, we sit down, we start with, how much money we're going to have for the entire month. And then we just start breaking it down. Okay, well, this is how much we're going to tithe, and this is how much this is how much the mortgage is, and this is how much the car payment is, and this is how much we're going to need for, the phones, the cable, the whatever. And you start just deducting. Okay, you started with, this much, and subtract that much, and subtract. And by the end of it, you should be down to zero. If you're not, well, then you have, money. Okay, what do I want to put this in savings? Do I want to put more on a debt? Do I want to pay ahead on a bill? But that's really the idea behind it, is really thinking out, well, what am I going to spend my money on for the entire month? And then just spending that money beforehand. And, and keeping in mind, it's like, some of your bills are the same, but some of them aren't. Like Mother's Day is this month. So I imagine everyone's going to go out and buy their mom, flowers or whatever. It's like, well, that's an added expense that you're not going to have in February. It's like, account for that. And then there's larger things like Christmas. It's going to be on December 25th this year. If you guys haven't heard, your kids are probably going to want presents, or your grandkids or nieces or whatever. So it's like you can start even thinking about like things like that now. It's like, okay, Christmas is going to be in December. I've got, 8 months? How much do I want to spend? And I can start, so it's not a huge burden in December. It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh man, it's December. I got to come up with, $1,000 for our Christmas presents. It's like, nope, I've been setting aside, $50 a paycheck or whatever. I don't have to worry about Christmas. It's taken care of, And the same thing with, like if you have bills that aren't monthly, like our trash bill comes every 3 months, and it's $60. And it's like every month, it's like, well, $20 for the trash, $20 for the trash, $20 for the trash. It's not like all of a sudden there's this added $60 bill. It's like, nope, we've already accounted for it. It's already there. If you have, property taxes or house insurance, if you have a mortgage, most of the time that's kind of built into your mortgage, through an escrow account. But if it's not, it's like you have to be mindful of that. Because, if all of a sudden July hits and, the county sends you a $900 bill, you're going to be like, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? It's like if these are things that you need to think of. If it's not built into your mortgage, you need to make sure that you're setting money aside. How much do I need to actually cover this? And make sure it's set aside, every month. And like I said, and then the hard part is following what you've written down. That takes self-control, that takes discipline, and that's really the hardest part. But, it's like if we can learn to be, if we can learn to show self-control with how much we spend, with how we handle our money, it becomes that heart issue that we can end up using that same principle that we've learned in other areas of our life to show self-control with, other areas, work ethic, with parenting, with cleaning, with whatever, because we're learning that, okay, this is what I plan to do, this is what I'm going to do. And that whole principle just rolls over. So that's really all I have. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to add or share?